I'm Mike Kelly from Project Healing Waters Omaha, and tonight we're going to start a two-part series on dry flies that you can use for preparing for the bluegill spawn. The first session tonight is kind of going with more trout flies, just to kind of show that you can, well, it's not going to show because we're not catching fish, but you can use trout flies to catch bluegill. Basically, they'll eat anything. So any dry flies that'll float, float real well, are going to catch fish easily in lakes where you're fishing in a 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 feet of water. They'll see that insect on the surface and they'll come up and get it. Also, Bill was asking for, he was saying that he wants to start tying some dry flies and learning some of the techniques. So since I hadn't done dry flies in a while, I figured I'd do tonight an Adams and a Black Gnat. And those are two, they're kind of fallen by the wayside because of the newer, we were talking earlier offline, a lot of the newer ways of doing wings with Comparadun wings and parachute style flies. You really don't see anybody creating any new patterns with duck quill slip wings or hackle tip wings. It's kind of difficult in level of difficulty of tying them, but and sometimes they can be a little delicate and either break off or kind of get shredded. Where the other types of wings that have kind of been developed in the later years are maybe a little bit more sturdy. But most of fly tying is history and carrying on a style of tying and carrying on the art. And these are definitely artistic flies. The first one we're going to do is Adams. And hopefully that shows up good with that green background. I think it does. It's a Michigan fly that was attributed to Leonard Halliday in the early 1920s. A guy named Charles Adams saw an insect when he was fishing a local pond, and he described it to Leonard, who then tied this pattern and he named it the Adams after Charles. It became one of the top fly patterns of all time. And really, it's been adapted to today's tying because today probably one of the most popular patterns that people use is a parachute Adams. The reason that this is so successful, and it's just most people try to match the hatch. They talk about matching the hatch, and so it doesn't matter what species of mayfly is actually coming off the water, what's hatching at the time. The gray body is just kind of generic enough to represent maybe some olives, some Baetis mayflies in smaller sizes. It can be other mayflies that are just maybe a few shades darker. But the key is it's the silhouette and the suggestion of movement and life that the brown and grizzly hackle mixed, if you really I'll try to really zoom in on this. It's brown and grizzly hackle mixed. And I think the grizzly hackle, for one thing, you don't see a lot of mayfly wings that are striped, but the striped wings, quill hackle tip wings there, and then the grizzly hackle around that represent the legs and the movement of the fly, and then the tail with grizzly and brown. It just is color contrast, and it just represents movement. So this is the first fly we're going to do, and I'll show you the pattern. It's of course a standard dry fly hook. Of course, you can tie these down into smaller sizes, but when you're using hackle tip wings and some of these materials, it really doesn't lend to much smaller than an 18. It's unless you really start using kind of the pointier hackle tips. The tail is brown and grizzly hackle fibers mixed. The body is muskrat underfur is the original. Nowadays, most people use the like superfine or a soft synthetic dubbing. The wings are grizzly hen tips, but I'll kind of show you some tips on tips, pun intended, I guess, on finding them in just generic, whether it's saddle hackle or other grizzly hackle. And then the hackle itself around the wings there is brown and grizzly mixed. And that's what an Adams is made of. So I'm going to go to the materials camera here. Okay. So I guess the first thing I'm going to talk about is the first thing that's tied on. Ideally, you would use the tips of hen hackle. And the reason is, if you look at the hen hackle, the tips are very rounded, where on so that's a hen cape right there, and this is a rooster cape right next to it. And these are very pointy. But if you get into some of these longer feathers that these are the ones that you use for dry flies. Probably right in here is getting to about size 12. The ones up in here are getting, down in the 18, 20 toward the neck of the bird. But the farther you go back, the rounder the tips end up. And so sometimes you can use some of these feathers on the outside of this. So a saddle starts right here. This is a neck, and so they cut it right here. The part that is attached on the chicken here that goes out toward the tail is the saddle. And so a lot of the feathers in saddle hackle that you can find in strung grizzly saddle hackle might have better tips for using these wings. I have an older neck. I don't have it right here with me, but all these hackles out here toward the end all have the tips clipped off of them because I used them for mosquitoes or Adams for wings. But the ideal thing is to use a grizzly cape or a grizzly hen is what I'm trying to say. And so I have a couple of those set here for to use on the fly. For the hackle, the best way to, if you can get these for dry flies, if you buy this is older, you really can't, I don't think you can buy too many of these anymore. But this is how it was done before, where if you wanted to heavily hackle it, you had to use maybe two of these, sometimes three, um, to hackle the fly. But now with the genetic hackle that the um, saddle has these real long feathers that are all the same size all the way down that feather. This is really the way to go. And to buy one of those saddles is very expensive, but you can get, Whiting has um, these 100 packs, they call them Whiting 100s, and their size, this is 16, and this is 14. Uh, just what maybe it's my opinion, but this normally seems to be about 14 to 18. I mean, there is some 16 in there. The 14 ends up being like 12 to 16. Um, there are some that are thicker and thinner, or longer and shorter in the hackles. But you can buy 100 packs that they say could tie up to 100 flies. Heo, and I believe Whiting does the same thing. They have like mixed packs like this. So I've got grizzly, white, black, brown, like a lighter, like a dark ginger, a light brown. There's a dark brown and some dark dun in there. Sometimes there's yeah, there is some black in there. Um, so these are mixed colors, and these are a lot cheaper than buying a big old saddle. So these are maybe 25 bucks for something you can probably tie at least 100 flies in. For the tail, I wanted to talk about what to use for tail fibers. So if you remember the picture that we showed in that PowerPoint that I showed you, the tail fibers are very stiff. So you can't use hen hackle for tail fibers because it's soft and webby. But I'll go back to um, this cape here. Um, if you look on the outsides, so I've taken this and turned it over, and now I'm at the end toward the saddle here. So you can use some saddle hackle for this. You just have to look around. But out here on the sides, before it gets much toward the back, there are some, they call them spade hackles, and it's because they're kind of shaped like a spade. They're kind of short and wide, and not so much on this side. There's maybe one there. But when you get to these hackles that are real short and wide off here on the side, you end up with, I'll show you up close on the Vice camera what these feathers look like. But on the inside, there's always a V, um, like a V shape along the rachis, where toward the base of the feather it's wider, and as you get toward the tip, it's narrower, and it's where the webby part of the feather is. And what you really want for these tail fibers is the part that doesn't have any web, the real stiff, like this, the real stiff fibers that are, it's not showing up good in that camera. I'll show you on the other camera. That's what we're going to use for the tail. And I'll bring my hackle over, and then we'll switch cameras and get to tying. So I'm going with a size 12 hook. Any dry fly hook. These were actually bought from Bass Pro Cabela's. Oops. Just a size 12 dry fly hook. And I'm doing size 12 because, for one thing, it's easier to do with, where'd my glasses go? easier to do with all the cameras and everything around, but also it shows up better on the camera. And first thing I'm going to do is put my thread on, and I'm
Mike, you're
using
out of
a,
focus. You're out of focus, Mike.
let me show the thread first. We'll focus on that, I'm sure. So this is Semperfly. It's 50 denier. So it's very small, but it's very, very strong.
Great stuff.
And it's, but the problem is it's very, very slippery. So I use this wax. You don't have to use this. Um, what this lets me do, if you don't have the wax, you can use a long tag and hold it tight in your fingers. Let me zoom out some. You can hold it real tight in your fingers and then just make more wraps around the hook shank to make it adhere. But with the wax, I can use a shorter, save my thread a little bit, and that really holds it in place. It doesn't slip at all. If I was to take that many wraps and then pull hard on it, I wouldn't bend the hook, I'd pull the thread off. So the point where I want to have the wings tied in, and that's the first thing I'm going to do, is about 2 eye lengths back. And the most common problem with tying these type of flies is tying the wings too far back. It tends to be kind of a problem. So I have 2 of these hackle tips that I cut off. And what I want to do is put the shiny sides facing each other together like that, so that they're splayed apart. And then what a lot of people do is they'll measure the wing. I want the wing to be a shank length. And that's the easiest part of these type of dry flies is the shank is the measurement for just about everything. So for the wings, I want it to be a shank length. So I'm going to put it up here with my thumbs. I'm going to mark the position and then move it forward to my thread. Now, a lot of people like to take that and strip all of this off and use bare stems to tie it down. The pro of that is you don't have a lot of bulk because you're tying the stems down. But the definite con of that is those wings will definitely twist on you, and it becomes so much more difficult than it has to be. So I'm laying these against the bend of the hook, marking them. So that's a shank length. And I'll move it back to my waiting thread. And I'll come up with a pinch wrap, which I took the thread, the wings are above the hook shank. I took the thread in between the wings and my thumb, and then I'm going to bring it down between my finger and the wings, and I'm going to pull straight down. Now I'm going to tie back a few wraps, and then I'm going to cut at an angle. And then just tie these butt ends down. And then come back right back to the base of those wings right here. So if I look at the top, they're pretty evenly spaced there. So now I'm going to reach around and grab these wings. And the disadvantage of this small thread is that it's kind of hard to build a thread dam in front of those wings. So I'm going to come forward and then come back toward them. And those are standing pretty good. Take a couple more wraps in front. So that brings my wings to 90 degrees. up from the hook shank. So now I'm going to come back to about the middle of the hook. And the next thing I'm going to do is the tail. So I have two of these, what I called spade hackles. I took this one from the side. You can see how it's real wide. Let me flip it around. I think you can see on this grizzly against that background that the center part of it, you can see a dark V shape. It's wider at the base and narrower toward the tips. That's where the webby part of the fibers are. But all these wider ends are very stiff hackle. So what I want to do is line up those two rakuses. Rake eye. I don't know if that's. And then try to do it in camera here. Line those up. And then I'm going to take about 9 or 5 fibers from one side there, 9 or 5 of each color. And then I have a mix of grizzly and brown. I have some shorter ones. I'm just going to kind of tap these butts. That's still maybe a few too many. I'm just going to take some of those away. I think that'll be good. All right, so I want this again to be the length of the shank. So I'm measuring it from the eye of the hook back. I'm going to mark it back here. And I know I need to cut just a little bit off, really just cut those curly ends off. And it'll be right for my weighting thread. So I cut those off. And then I'll tie those in on top of the hook shank. There's my tail. So now I'm going to come back to about the point. The body I haven't really talked about much, but here's a patch of muskrat fur. The original hat is muskrat. And I have a piece. You could also use just gray dubbing. You could use soft touch from BTs. There's Adams gray right here. It's a little bit darker gray in the superfine dubbing that you can get in a box. But since I can't find my little piece of muskrat right now, probably dropped it on the floor somewhere. I'll grab some of this. So with this muskrat comes a little 2x2 patch here. And you've got under fur that's gray, and then you've got this these brown guard hairs. So what I'm going to do to grab, I'm going to use this side over here. I'm just going to grab some and cut it real close to the hide. That should be enough. Now, what I've got here, I think you can see that. I've got all these guard hairs out here that are dark brown. I don't want those in a dry fly. So I'm going to come in here and just pull those out. Shorter guard hairs here. So now all I'm left with is this soft underfur. So I'm just going to kind of mix that up a little bit. I still might have some shorter guard hairs in there, but I'm just going to kind of mess that up into a ball. And then I'm going to turn my hook so the hook point isn't in my way. I'm just going to grab little bits of it like this. Can you see those little few slips? I'm just going to spin that onto my thread. I've done these dubbing things before. Just take a few hairs and just add them to the dubbing. And it makes dubbing so much easier than trying to do big bunches. What I want is a very slim dubbing noodle because mayflies have skinny bodies. And you can always overlap your dubbing to make it thicker. But it's pretty hard to take it off once you, so I didn't use that whole clump. But I'm just going to hold my tail and come back and start dubbing a body forward. Zoom in some. So my theory of muskrat, beaver, otter, they are water animals, and their fur needs to shed water in order for them to stay alive. So you could use beaver for this if it's gray. Muskrat. If you use things like rabbit, things like that, they're land animals, and those will absorb water more. And so I think that's why muskrat was used for this type of fly. So I've got 3 hackles here. One's for later, the black one, but I'll use the grizzly and brown here. And first I'm going to grab the grizzly, and I'm going to strip off some of these fibers. But then I'm going to take this top side and just grab a few more off of the top side. And then I'm going to tie that in. And what that is going to do is, as I wrap that feather forward, it's going to make my hackle stand more straight out. I'm going to make sure I get that. I have a pretty short little hackle stem there. There we go. All right, so that one's tied down. Now I'll take the brown and I'll do the same thing. Shiny side facing me. Expose a little bit of hackle stem, and then take a few off there toward the top.
Quick question.
Go ahead.
What difference does shiny or dull make when you're doing this? Does it really mean anything or
Um,
sorry?
so the way that a hackle, wish I could show it better, but the shiny side of a hackle, let me zoom out some. It's like this is the shiny side of a hackle, and normally it'll kind of cant backwards. The dull side of the hackle is going to cant forwards. So as you're wrapping the hackle, it's going to, the shiny side is going to be facing forward. It's going to kind of lean toward the back. So there's differing opinions of whether a dry fly should be facing forward or backward. But when you go to tie a whip finish, you're going to want, You're not going to want all your hackle to be facing forward. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, thanks.
Hey, Mike.
So,
Oh,
go ahead.
no, when you were doing the wrapping, you were wrapping in front, then you did like 2 wraps, and then you went back to the front. Are you trying to
So,
build up more by the head,
no,
or you?
again, for one thing, this thread is very, very skinny thread. So all I was doing was tying down that stem, and I was coming back toward the wings. And then I wanted to make sure it was tied down back here so that when I start that hackle, it's got room to put a couple of wraps behind the wing and then a couple wraps in front of the wing. So the number of wraps, it doesn't really matter with 50 denier thread. If you're using, you know, 140 denier thread or something like that, you wouldn't want to do that many wraps because you're going to end up causing too much bulk. So there's different ways you can do this. You can try to wrap, Gretchen does this beautifully. You can try to wrap one feather forward and tie it off and leave some spaces and then wrap the other one forward in between. Another way to do this, and I need to kind of make some time here because I got one more fly to do. I'm going to do both feathers at the same time. So I'm going to take 2 wraps behind the wings, hold the wings up, and do one good wrap behind the wings, and that helps kind of stand them up. And then I don't want to wrap over my hackle, so I'm kind of doing this almost like a wet fly. So I've done like 3 wraps in front of 2 hackles. So now I have a grizzly brown mix there. I did a couple of wraps, and now I'm going to sweep all this back. And then starting at the eye, I'm just going to make a little bit of a head here. And what that also does is kind of dog legs that hackle, so you can see it's kind of leaning backwards now. That'll let me do a nice clean whip finish. Tighten that up. And then I'll make a V in my scissors and just push it against that thread. Do the same with the hackles. Make a V in my scissors. And instead of actually cutting, I'm just going to push against those hackles. So that way I don't cut a bunch of short hackles there. I just broke the rachis basically. So that's an Adams. Is there any other questions on that?
Nicely tied, Mike. Thank you.
So that's one way to do a wing.
Hey, Mike,
Yeah.
don't have a question, but I have a suggestion for some guys, particularly if you're going out west. For instance, taking my brother to Yellowstone second week of July,
Right.
the guide suggests using a purple haze. And it's basically a variation of the Adams, only with some reason. Purple body, purple hackle, along with whatever color hackle you want. And extremely effective out there. And it kind of goes against the conventional wisdom of so-called matching the hatch. There's nothing purple out there on the water that hatches, but it does work extremely well. There you go.
Yeah,
Yep.
purple has become real hot this year. It was a couple of years ago too, but now it's come back.
I sent off an article to, what was it, Mike, to you, John, and Al. There was some study about how they see purple differently from trout. Because they got one extra set of cones and they see it differently than we do.
That kind of leads to what I was talking about with Um, so much has been focused on colors of dubbing. This is a, blue-winged olive or a calabatus color or whatever. And I think it's more catching the fish's attention and then having the fish see that that's the silhouette of something that's food, especially in a river or a stream. That's coming by them so fast, if you've ever watched videos, that they grab pieces of leaves and sticks and stuff and they spit them out. Fish don't have hands. So the only way they can tell if something is food or not is to grab it, kind of, they feel it in their mouth and then they spit it out if it's debris. And so if they're just sitting there going through leaves and sticks and, oh, there's a bug, and then all of a sudden they see something that catches their attention, they look at it and they see the silhouette of a bug, then that's going to, so purple or red is always said to be a very special color for fish in general. This is a blue-winged olive with a quill wing, and that's what we'll do next. It has a tail of the coq de leon tailing fibers. They're just real speckly and everything. But again, you could use this. This was a pretty popular fly in older days, the blue-winged olive. This is actually a quill body, if you will. It's the hackle stem of a sort of a ginger barred. It's kind of a grizzly ginger kind of thing. I have a neck of this, and basically what you do is you find a spade feather that has the long, stiff fibers for the tail. And then what I normally try to do is find one that's longer, strip the fibers for the tail, but then I take the rest of that feather and strip all of the barbs off. And you can tie that feather in and then just wrap it forward. You can see the downfall of that unless you soak that rachis. Sometimes it'll split. You can see right here in the center that a piece kind of came up. So I just coated that with some a little bit of Sally Hansen's just to kind of hold it in place. But it's, you use the appropriate size dry fly hackle there and hackle tip wings. And it's very similar to the Adams in the wings and the hackle, but the body's a little bit different style. But all of these types of flies like this are, again, representative of the shape of a mayfly, not necessarily an exact color and everything. The next one's going to be a black gnat. And what time is it? 6:50. I think we got this. Instead of going through the whole materials camera and everything, I kind of showed you the basics. So I will just mount another hook, same size hook. And this is going to have a little bit different wing. I'll use the same thread, wax it. So I'm going to go back a little ways. Flip off my tag end, and then I'm going to come back to where I'm again 2 eye lengths back from the eye. And now I've got, where's my quills? Right here. You hear a lot about using matched quills. If you really want to geek out on it, you can if you have a mallard wing, you can take the very first feather on the left wing and the very first feather on the right wing, and then just kind of tape them together, and you know those are matched. But honestly, it really doesn't. One might be a little bit more deformed than the other, and there's a lot of reasons that they may not completely match. So normally when you buy these, they're not necessarily matched exact position on the feather. If you really look at these, you see that shiny section on the underside of the feather on both of these. That's kind of like on a hackle, the webby portion. The only usable part of this feather is really from that line that goes up here. Can you see that? Out to the tips. So for dry flies, for these type of wings or wet flies, about probably 2/3 of the way up in this section right here is the prime spot, because they're fairly straight. You can see the ends aren't real frizzy. They're pretty straight edges. And when you get up here toward the tips, this is almost unusable. Because if you try to tie a wing in using this pithy stuff that's in the center here, it's just going to like twist up, roll, and split. These right here, you can get them to look pretty good. I'm kind of getting to the sweet spot right in here, and that's what I'm going to use tonight. So for the wing, if you want to look at it as a left and a right feather, on a duck, this is a duck wing quill. The short side here, this is where like goose biots. That's similar to what these are. They're real stiff and short. So that's in the front of the wing. So this is in the back of the wing. And then this is the other side. So like this is a left and this is a right. But it really doesn't matter which one's left and which one's right, as long as you have one from each side. So I'm going to take a hook that's the same size, and I'm going to hold it up to the edge of that feather. I'm going to stick the point down and then pull it through. Okay. So that's one. And then I'll cut that loose. And I'll just set it on my pedestal base. And then I'll grab the hook and I'll do the same thing to the other side. Hold it against the edge just to measure the right proportion there.
Mike, Bill here.
Yeah.
Can you use any other kind of quill feather, or do you have to use waterfowl? Only reason I asked the question, I've got things like pheasant wings and stuff like that seem to have fairly good stiff quills, or is it because it's a waterfowl?
I don't think it matters. In England, they used water hen. They used, all kinds of different birds. Ideally, what's traditionally done is duck quills, the natural gray duck quills, for like a royal coachman. It's white duck quills, and then white duck quills can be colored to different colors.
Yeah,
to
it does
use for
matter
different.
because duck and goose, because they're waterfowl, their feathers have a natural oil impregnation in them, and they tend to float better than non-waterfowls.
Thank you. I wasn't for sure.
So again, I'm gonna put the shiny sides of these toward each other so that they spread apart. You remember I was talking about that cant of the feathers or whatever. So I'm going to slide my finger and thumb back and forth to where I have the tips aligned. Now you can tell that this far down the feather, there's a little bit of wispy edges there, but that's not really going to matter, especially not to the fish.
Can you move your fingers a little closer to the hook, Mike? There we go.
Yeah, let me zoom out some. All right, so I've got those two quill slips, and I want to measure them again. Length of the shank. Again, the tendency is to get them too far back and too long. What I would do is start at the base of one of these feathers and start practicing as you move your way up the feather, so that when you get up into the good stuff, you're into the real good part of the feather. So again, I'll measure it, and then I'll do another pinch wrap. I'm going to come up and then come down. Now I'm pinching as I pull down on the thread. And now I'm going to work my way backwards. And then cut those at an angle. So now I don't need to actually cover these completely with thread. I just need to tie them down so that we're not moving anywhere. And then I'll come right back to the base of that, stand these up, and again, put a little bit of a thread dam in front of them. So I need to come forward, go back, and just kind of make like a little cone shape, like a ramp back there. So now my wings are standing straight out from the top of the hook. And actually, a lot of people split them at this point. I'd rather have them stuck together because they're out of my way. So for a for the black gnat, I want to use in this case I want to use red saddle hackle is what I selected here, but you can see that the skinny part, the webby part is toward the center. So I have some nice long stuff out here on the sides. I'm going to grab some of those and pull them away from the rachis. And that's going to be my tail. Measure it to the length of the shank. Move it to this hand. And then it turns out that I'm going to have to use all of that. So I'm keeping it on top of the hook shank. As I work back, and I know I'm at the end of the shank when I hang it down, and it's right at the barb. So I'm going to come forward to the barb and then turn my hook away so I don't poke myself in the finger. In this case, I'm going to use, let's see, thought I had some, here it is. Fell onto the floor. All right. I'm going to try this Touchatron dubbing. It's got a little bit of kind of some flash in it, some Antron. You know, actually that looks a little bit too coarse. I'm going to go to my superfine and get some black. Okay, so what I'm doing is just taking the dubbing and kind of carding it. I'm trying to make it all long fibers. So I'm going to take just a few, spin them onto the thread. In this case, I'm not so much coloring the thread, just making some bulk. Grab a few fibers.
Is that
spin
thicker,
'em
Mike?
on. What's that?
Is that daubing thicker? Are you putting it on thicker than the last one?
No,
Okay.
same deal, just different color. This is longer fibers because it's synthetic. And the stuff I was using before was the under fur from the muskrat. So it was just, I think that's at the most about maybe a half an inch at the most. This
There
stuff
are
gets closer
very-
to an inch in length.
There are very few fish that are colorblind.
Very few fish that are colorblind.
Yeah, I know attention is being paid to what color we use for making these flies.
Right. And I think it's more important that you're using dark flies to represent dark mayflies, light flies to represent light mayflies. But one key is when you're fishing at night, it doesn't matter if it's a dark, medium, or light colored mayfly. When a fish is looking up toward a lighted sky from the moon, stars, whatever, they're looking up and they're seeing a silhouette on the water that's basically black. So you hear a lot of people saying to fish black flies or black lures at night. And that's because it shows up the best against it seems counterintuitive to have a night sky be light, but when you're down in the water and you're looking up, you're seeing the moon, stars, street lights in the city, whatever.
I know it's been mentioned in some of the like FFI and with Al, he's mentioned when he like fishes in alpine forest, he's using more of a green color. So he's done things where he said like he was in Red Canyon somewhere in Wyoming that he'd
Right.
use more of a rust colored type fly. I think I don't want to misquote something, but I know that's been mentioned before. So I don't know.
He's
Yeah.
talking about the LaFontaine theory of attraction,
Yep.
where it more than a theory of attraction, it's kind of focused on what a trout sees in relation to the environment. So in a alpine forest, they're used to seeing a green, in the background, or a green hue or whatever. And so green flies are typically will show up better to a trout's eye than than a green fly will in an orange canyon where like Bill's saying, like the rock in the canyon is orange. An orange fly might work better than that because a trout's eye is used to seeing orange colors or whatever. To me, it would be kind of, that's interesting because I would think as a non-scientist that maybe that would blend in better and not be as visible.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. You'd want to
But
do the opposite, right?
but Gary LaFontaine was he would actually dive and look at flies from subsurface, and and then Alan Gretchen wrote a book called LaFontaine's Legacy,
Mhm.
and they talk about the theory of attraction in that book. I don't know if you saw, but I had enough wrapped back on that hackle that I was able to just snap it forward. If you're brave, you can do that. If not, you want to use your scissor tips for that.
I do have Al's book, and I really like reading that book. It's kind of one of my fun books to read.
It's very well written. Also, if you get on YouTube and look for, forget what it was called, but it's basically Al and Gretchen, and then two other people, Paul and Char Simpson. And they tie a lot of Gary LaFontaine's signature flies, and they explain what Gary talked about. This was toward the end of his life, and they did this as a project to basically carry on his legacy, and talked about what Gary said about the flies as he created them. He was not a good fly tire in most, he wouldn't make it on Instagram nowadays, but he was a big study of what trout see, how trout react to different, they would actually watch naturals float along and watch what the trout did to the naturals underwater, either with cameras or with scuba gear. And that kind of knowledge you don't really get nowadays. I mean, people don't want to do that. So anything that can be passed on from Gary LaFontaine, there's a reason the book Caddisflies is respected to this day, and other books maybe kind of fell by the wayside. It's because of what he put into it. He was a science guy, but he wasn't necessarily an entomologist. He wasn't a fish, what do they call a fish biologist? But he really studied them
Theologist.
as a fisherman. He studied them as a fisherman and from a science perspective. And so he was more curious about what a fly looked like as it floated by. Tim Flagler does this too with his son. They watch flies go by as they're tied onto the tippet and what they look like as you're fishing them. And they kind of relate that to how a fish reacts to a natural floating by, and whether they'll take the natural or the one that we tied. Any questions on quill wings or the black gnat?
Very nice fly, Mike.
Um,